All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I know it's cold and snowy, and there are probably other places you'd rather be. So I appreciate you coming. I'd like to thank the Chatham Education Foundation. There are a number of CEF members and trustees and donors sprinkled throughout the audience, and Chatham Education Foundation, as Stacy Ewald enters the auditorium right now, is the organization that made this night possible and the other events like it that we've had over the years. So special thanks to Chatham Education Foundation. The topic of this evening's presentation is student well-being, basically, and student wellness in the district. And I have a lot to cover, so I'm going to try to move kind of quickly. We have a little bit of a technology glitch with the projector, which may be on its last legs. So the screen is a little smaller than it usually is, and there will be some numbers and so on. So if you feel like moving closer to the center or to the front of the auditorium, you might get a better view of some of the slides. And I'm going to try to do my best to weave together three different components that touch on student wellness one way or the other. The first will be just to share with you data from a survey that we created and administered last year at the end of the school year to our middle school and high school students. And that survey and the information that'll be on the slides tonight really is just about what our kids are doing, what they're thinking, and what they're feeling. So it provides a little bit of a snapshot of wellness from the student perspective, at least in grades 6 through 12. After that, I'll talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that we have going on in the district right now to address some of what our students are doing and feeling and seeing. And I'll try to do that in a few minutes, 10 minutes or so. And then I'm going to spend the rest of the presentation on college. And the reason I would like to do that is that in my discussions with school counselors, I met with the high school counselors earlier today, and our student assistance counselors, Lisa Latarula, Alex Emmer. College really is a driving force behind a lot of the decisions that we make, both as parents and as educators. And it filters down into our students. And we're in a community where just about all the parents, or many of the parents, higher percentage certainly than the average community in the United States, is well educated themselves. And the expectation naturally is that our children will go off to college. And in fact, just about all of them do. So I'm going to spend some time on that. So first up, I'll talk about the survey. Alex and Lisa, who are down in the second row, even they don't like to be in the front row. And they'll join me potentially on stage at the end of the night for a Q&A. They created a survey last year. We got parent permission for the students who took the survey, which ended up resulting in about a 64-65% participation rate at CMS and CHS. And the goal of the survey was just to see what our students are doing and thinking with respect to some critical issues that could affect them. So this is where it's a little tricky to see, but we're recording this presentation. This will all be available on our website. So the first question had to do with how much homework kids are doing, because this is something that comes up at our PTO meetings and so on. And actually at the middle school, as you can kind of see from up there, maybe if you can't see it that well, but upwards of 85%, practically 90% of students at the middle school reported doing an hour or two of homework a night. That number started to change though at the high school, and our high schoolers, a higher percentage of them report doing 3+ and even 5 or more hours of homework a night. And I'm not going to hyperanalyze any of these slides. I'm just going to kind of give you the information, and you can draw your own conclusions. I'll have a few takeaways at the end after we move through. How much are you sleeping? And again, at the middle school level, just about all of our students are sleeping, or many of our students, I should say, are sleeping 7 or more hours a night. At the high school, that drops off pretty considerably. The high school is the blue bar, if you can't tell, and the middle school is red. So at the high school, our students are sleeping a lot less than what would be recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics. Many reasons for that. How much time do you spend engaging in social media and texting and emailing and so forth? And you can see those numbers kind of go up in high school. Again, high school is the blue bar. And more than a third of our students report engaging in that kind of digital activity more than 3 hours a day. I've had to deal each of my years as superintendent with instances of students sending images of themselves that we would rather them not send to other students. And you can tell by this slide and the next slide how many of you think it's okay to send sexual images as long as it's between friends. Surprising number of kids at the high school even agree that that's okay to do. Have you ever actually done that? And you can see at the high school, almost 1 in 10 have, and at the middle school, it's a lower number, but I can tell you the issues that I've had to deal with have all been from the middle school level students. And if you ever received an image, of course, it's a much higher percentage than students who have actually sent them. Have you ever tried to control your weight rather, by not eating or exercising, or for long periods of time or vomiting after eating? And more than 10% of students in both schools indicated yes. Have you ever drank alcohol? And you can see that the number goes up with high school students as opposed to middle school students. How did you get the alcohol you drank? And again, the blue bar, high school kids, red bar, middle school kids. You can see the middle school students frequently took it from a family member, presumably a parent, or someone gave it to them, either a friend or older sibling or something like that. Have you ever tried marijuana? 20% of high schoolers indicated yes. You can see very few middle school students indicated having used marijuana. Moving into some of the harder drugs, cocaine, you can see most of our students, 99 and 97% respectively, in the two schools have never indicated using cocaine. Same thing with meth. Ecstasy, a slightly higher percentage has used ecstasy. Heroin is low too, but I have stated when I've talked about this with administrators in our district that if the survey is representative of the total population, and that's an if, I'm not a psychometrician, but even if 1% of students at the high school have tried heroin and 1% have used it more than once, we're talking about 24 students have tried heroin at least one time. And so that's an alarming statistic, of course, and I'm sure you all know that heroin is an epidemic in New Jersey, across the country. Its lethality it's more lethal than it's ever been before, so this is of great concern to us. Prescription drugs, we know that students sometimes take drugs that are not prescribed and not prescribed to them. And our student assistance counselors can probably elaborate on that. Steroids. Has anyone ever offered or sold you an illegal drug on school property? Very few kids at the middle school indicate that, but 10% at the high school indicate that they have been offered a drug on school property. Is it easy to get a hold of illegal drugs in Chatham? The answer is a pretty resounding yes at the high school level, which isn't really surprising. These are interesting. The student assistance counselors asked, how wrong do you think it would be if your parents found out if you were smoking? And you can see universally, both CMS and CHS students think that their parents would be pretty upset. They think their parents would be less upset if they were drinking than smoking cigarettes. And marijuana is somewhere kind of in between. So if you stack all of those up at the middle school, you can see that red bar is marijuana, the blue bar is cigarettes, and the green bar is alcohol. So alcohol is the most, students have the most, permissive view, if you will, or they think that their parents have the most permissive view of alcohol. Again, probably not surprising. And at the high school, it really drops off, so that the bars are kind of more distributed. And almost a third of kids think that their parents would not find it to be very wrong if they were smoking marijuana. Moving into what I find to be the most concerning of all the slides. This asks, have you spent more than 2 weeks in a row feeling so sad and hopeless that you stopped doing your normal activities? So getting into kind of the depressiveness of the student body. And you can see a fifth of the high schoolers report yes, and a 10th of middle schoolers report the same. In the past year, have you seriously considered attempting suicide? That's an 8% at the high school, and a 5% at the middle school. And then did you make a plan, actually make a plan to carry out suicide? And 5% at CHS and 4% at CMS. And that's super concerning to us. We always, every year, have students that we have identified as exhibiting behaviors that are concerning enough that relate to suicide, and we always have a few students attempt, where we have had that in the past, but we certainly haven't had 5% of our student population on the radar screen. So that's a significant concern. We asked how often students sit quietly, and we were actually a little bit surprised at how many kids said that they do sometimes sit quietly without distraction in both buildings. And then asked them, how would you feel to sit in silence with no distractions? And again, kind of surprising that almost 40% in both buildings stated that they would appreciate that. And another third or so indicated that they would be tired, they might fall asleep. So, a few takeaways, and there are more than these, but I'll put five, and I put 5 into the presentation. Most significant is that some of our students are really reporting some very concerning levels of unhappiness. Second is that our high schoolers in particular are not getting enough sleep, and that's actually associated with unhappiness. Some of our students have the perception that their parents are somewhat permissive about alcohol and marijuana, especially at the high school. Small number of our students, very small, but when you extrapolate, it's still a number that's scary, report having used heroin or other very hard drugs. And some of our students use social media in ways that probably as parents we would not want them to use. So, what are we doing? Now I'll get into some of what is going on in the district. And I'll break this into 3 different areas. All 3 of them have been places we've been trying to devote a lot of attention to over the past couple of years. In terms of substance abuse, we have continued to bring in student programs. Our student assistance counselors have been great about this. At times, we've had those folks come in and present to the students, and then in the evening hours present to parents. We also last year stepped up the number of parent programs we were doing. We held about 8 parent programs on critical student issues. We invited speakers in and experts in. 2 of those had to do specifically with substance abuse, but a couple of others touched on substance abuse in indirect ways. And this year we continued that, but we're working with Berkeley Heights, New Providence, Summit, and Millburn. And the first session over in Summit, I know a couple of you attended that session, was specifically about substance abuse and ways that we're trying to work to foster awareness and prevention and so forth. We've made some policy changes. The most significant was probably that we worked with the Morris County Sheriff's Office for the first time and the Chatham Township Police Department to bring in a K-9 into Chatham High School. We conducted a screening, I guess you'd call it a screening, where a dog randomly hit some lockers, and we want to use that as a deterrent method so that students know that we disapprove of their use of illicit substances, but we really disapprove of any kind of substance being on school property. We've hired additional counseling staff, so I mentioned For the first time 3 years ago, we hired a student assistance counselor specifically for Chatham Middle School because we know that's when a lot of behaviors and experimentation begin. And we also have implemented a health curriculum, a new health curriculum in 11th and 12th grade. That curriculum touches on substance abuse issues at an age-appropriate time. Julie Patterson, our supervisor in that area, also has brought in or established a relationship with Drew University, where some of their students are working with our seniors on key issues that they may face when they get to college. With respect to social media, as I'm sure you all know, we have very quickly in the past 2 years established a K-5 design and technology program. Part of that curriculum entails the students' use of technology, the permanency of what goes on the internet, and we have a required course in 7th grade called Digital Footprints. Right now it's called Digital Footprints of Global Awareness. We're changing the name to Digital Footprints and Self-Awareness moving forward. And we talk to students or try to educate students about their use of technology, their use of media, and long-term consequences that that can potentially have. Again, we've also been doing critical student issues presentations. Last year we had 2 of our assistant principals come and present in the Chatham Middle School Media Center about websites and social media and all kinds of stuff that they see kids working with. And we're going to do something actually March 18th and May 24th that I hadn't announced to any parents before tonight, but our administrative team and our teachers have been working, and what we're going to try to do on those 2 days is have 2 days in which students don't look at a screen. We're not going to use smart boards. We're not going to use computers on those days. This is the goal. And we're going to see if we can all survive without looking at a screen of some kind or another. So that's in the docket. So after March 17th and St. Patrick's Day, we'll see what we can do with moving kids along through a school day without seeing a screen. May 24th also will be the day after a visit that we have from a guest speaker as part of this series. Her name is J.C. Good, and she is an activist for safe driving, and she's going to give a talk to high schoolers during the day, and then she'll be here. I hope all of you come on May 23rd to talk about her story, and we're hoping that that motivates some of us to go screen-free, even with cell phones. And so we're hoping on that day to persuade students here at the high school and the middle school to not even look at their cell phone during the course of the day. I don't know when the last time I went 5 hours without looking at my cell phones. And then, of course, stress, which relates to those slides about concerning behaviors, suicidal ideation, and so forth. We've added staff at our elementary buildings to identify problematic behaviors or issues as early as possible. We have our SACs at the secondary level. Thanks to the CEF and the PTO, we have established a character education kind of program at all of our K-3 schools called Second Step. We hit this topic pretty hard in high school as well, how to manage stress, especially when you get into the college setting. We're trying to change our furniture in our schools, where we have a little bit more of a blend of furniture, where kids are standing a little bit more. We use balance balls again, thanks to the CEF and PTO. We've had conversations at all of our school buildings about homework and what's an appropriate level of homework, what is effective in terms of homework practice. We're continuing those conversations. And as I'm sure you all know, we've had a focus this year on mindfulness and trying to teach students how to relax themselves and focus and settle down and do some breathing exercises if they feel like they're becoming anxious or nervous. This has been going very, very well. All of our physical education staff, all of our administrators have been trained to some degree. At Lafayette Avenue School, Cheryl Russo, the principal, initiated something with Cindy Weiner, who's the counselor there, called Focus for 5. And in the beginning of the school day, and then after lunch, Cheryl just kind of picks a video of a nature scene. She lays over some kind of message like, let's focus on kindness today. And students just sit and they try to do a little bit of breathing, but we've had a marked decline in the number of disciplinary incidents at Lafayette Avenue School this year. I'm not saying it's causal or 100% causal in terms of the Focus for 5 and discipline, but it's a positive development. And then at our health and phys ed class at CMS, Meg Falk, who is our health teacher, she has worked with students on breathing exercises if they become anxious. And at the end of the first cycle, Alex Emmer and Meg Falk administered a survey to students. Students reported very much liking the breathing exercises and also reported using them outside of school, in particular when they were trying to fall asleep at night. So again, a nice development. And health classes at CHS work in that regard too. So what can you do if you're here? The first is deliver consistent messages to kids. One of those messages, for example, would be that all of the evidence suggests that the longer you can delay the initiation of substance use, including alcohol, in other words, the longer it takes for a student to start experimenting, the better. So if you can push off kids from dabbling in drinking alcohol from the age of 14 or 15 to the age of 17 or 18, or even better, 19 or beyond, the less likely it will be that those students will develop dependencies and other problems later on in life. So I'm not naive. I don't think that kids in Chatham, 99% of whom are going to go to college, are never going to drink, have an alcoholic beverage. But the longer we can push off their introduction to alcohol, the better it will be. Certainly listening to children and seeking out support when necessary. If your child is having some kind of a problem or an issue, if you can reach out to the school, that would be helpful. We have trained staff, and we also have the ability to just refer kids to, or give you the names of experts in the community that can help. We also have a relationship with the Madison YMCA and what is known as Project Community Pride, which is a counseling service for families and students in our school district. So certainly spread the word if you know of a family who is experiencing some kind of difficulty, please have them reach out. And then lastly, think about the elephant in the room. And, sorry about that. The elephant takes different forms. I'm kind of joking, but I call the elephant in the room college, because college is a focus, college is a reality, college is something that probably every one of us in this room expects for our kids. We probably also, most of us have fond memories of being in college. College is the destination for just about all of our students. So I want to pivot a little bit here and just talk about, in the final third of this presentation, some of our assumptions about college and some of what our data says in terms of our assumptions or what our kids are doing. I'll start with the very familiar. So you've probably seen this, it's all over our school profiles, and year to year we present this kind of data at board meetings. But basically what it shows is that year after year, and it's been like this for as long as I can remember, upwards of 90% of our students go on to four-year schools. Those kids who don't go on to four-year schools, almost all of them enroll in two-year schools. And Morris County College is a terrific place, best market in the business, especially if you transfer after 2 years into a four-year school, you'll come out ahead of the game. But most of our kids go to four-year schools. And within the four-year schools, within that category, those students who go on to four-year schools, they go to really outstanding schools. And typically we track where they wind up based on the Barron's profile, or Barron's profiles of American colleges. So there are competitiveness categories: most competitive, highly competitive, very competitive, and so forth. And as you can see from just looking up here, typically more than half of our kids go to either most or highly competitive schools. Another third of them or so, or close to that anyway, go to very competitive, and on and on. So we're very proud of that, naturally. So if we look into that even a little bit more closely, so where exactly are they going? And year after year, our kids go to great schools. They go to schools in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, except New Jersey. They don't like going to New Jersey, but they like going to all the schools around New Jersey. And they go to schools that you find in the US News and World Report rankings. So if you buy a US News and World Report, it's kind of the standard bearer of college rankings. The schools that our kids go to are frequently in the top 50 or so of that publication. Last year, these were the top 10. They break schools out to different categories, so there are national universities, those big schools, big names. Then they go to liberal arts colleges. They also do some regional rankings and so forth. And the names on this list are pretty familiar. Doubt anyone's surprised that the top 5 there: Princeton, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Stanford. So should we focus so heavily on those schools? Should that be the barometer that we're constantly using to look at where kids are going? There are some alternative viewpoints that are becoming more prominent now that I would ask you to consider as you negotiate the college admissions process, whenever you do. First is there are a number of books that are coming out, some of them more recently than others. I haven't read Excellent Sheep yet, and I'm only halfway through How to Raise an Adult, but the other 2 books up there all get to kind of the point that there are many great colleges out there, and in some ways the student is really more important than the college. That is to say that if the student has initiatives, if the student takes advantage of the programs that a college offers, it doesn't really matter if the student goes to Harvard or Rutgers or Indiana. The student will seek out opportunity, and in the long run, the student will be just as fine. Obviously, there are other viewpoints, but I'm just describing one of the viewpoints espoused in these books. There are also frequently more and more alternative ranking systems that one could consider when looking at college. And the alternative ranking systems kind of take a look at how the US News and World Report bases their ranking methods, and either dismisses some of this or places more emphasis on parts of it, and so forth. So just as an example, student selectivity. In the US News and World Report rankings, a school becomes more selective if it admits a lower percentage of its applicants. Some people believe that that's an incentive for schools to jack up their application numbers, but admit the same number of students. So that if you are admitting only 10% of students as opposed to 20%, you become more competitive, you go up in the rankings. Some folks take issue with that. So there are a lot of college rankings out there. You can Google these, and you can kind of see if any of them you find interesting. I think that chasing college rankings is like chasing high school rankings, is like a dog chasing its tail. They're two-dimensional. And so we don't want to be too hung up in the name of a college or where it ranks on some kind of list. But having said that, it's fun to read these things and see if it changes your perception of the school. So I'll start with The Economist. It's a magazine that I like to read. They issued college rankings last year. They had 2 categories of rankings. One was value added, where they essentially used a number of variables, and some of these have limitations, but their goal was to try to find which schools had the biggest impact on kids who enrolled there. So they looked at the earnings of their graduates and then tried to guess or come up with a number of what the graduate would have earned had she or he not attended the school. And then they have another category of ranking, which is just flat out the median earnings. So they just look at how much their graduates are earning, or the alumni earning 10 years after they graduate. And on this list, top 10, many of the names are familiar, but there are some that creep in that you might not expect, like Washington and Lee being the number 1 for value added, as an example. Looking how this might relate to Chatham, for example, Harvard, number 2 on the list for just straight up median earnings. $87,000 a year was what their average graduate earned 10 years after they graduated. RPI, which is Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, came in at number 5, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, $82,000. And they had about, for the past 3 years, if you look at our graduating classes, 2013, 14, and 15, we had about the same number of applicants to those 2 schools. Only 2 of them got into Harvard, but almost 2/3 of them got into RPI. And interestingly, of the kids who didn't get into Harvard, a few of them had a perfect 800 on the SAT and a GPA that, would make your head spin. Whereas with RPI, even though it's a phenomenal school and it's not easy to get into, certainly the credentials of the students were probably a little bit more reasonable or wider ranging. Payscale.com does rankings too. They base it on ROI, return on investment, so it's similar to The Economist, but they take into account how much the tuition is at the school. Then they look at the earnings of the alumni 20 years out. And their top 10 schools is also pretty different than you might find with US News and World Report. In terms of how that might relate to Chatham, and again, I apologize, this is cut off a little bit, but Carnegie Mellon, that's the school that was number 25 in the ROI for PayScale. And it's a phenomenal school, ranked 25th out in Pittsburgh. Everyone's heard of Carnegie Mellon. Worcester Poly, if you're from Massachusetts, you probably know Worcester Polytechnic Institute, but it's 45 minutes, an hour outside Boston. That was ranked 16th. And if you look at our kids in the last 3 years, Carnegie Mellon was kind of like Harvard. We had 33 kids apply, only 4 got in. All of their GPAs were above 4. Worcester Poly, we had 8 students apply, 5 got in. So interesting, about the same ranking according to PayScale, but the odds of getting in were probably a little bit better if you applied to Worcester Poly. Another one, MIT, sorry it's cut off. MIT, no surprise, one of the greatest schools on earth, 7th in the PayScale ranking. Stevens Institute, half-hour away in Hoboken, actually was 3rd. And on the Economist ranking, Stevens Institute was also top 10. I think it was 5th or 4th. For our kids, MIT, past 3 years, none of our graduates have gotten into MIT. With Stevens, again, almost 2/3 of our kids have gotten into Stevens, with a much broader range of GPA and ACT and SAT scores. In fact, for MIT, 5 of the 7 had either a perfect or the highest score you can get on the ACT or an 800 on math section of the SAT. So just something to think about. Poets and Quants is another website that ranks schools, and one of the rankings that they put out is based just on the alumni of big companies. And if you look at a big company, where did the greatest percentage of its alumni come from? And they actually rank the top 10. So Morgan Stanley, Google, JP Morgan, Amazon, a lot of familiar names, Stanford, no surprise, Harvard, no surprise, but some names that you might not expect. City University of New York, Baruch, it's where my brother happened to go to school, on the list of 2 of the big finance places to work. Rutgers is on the list twice. I don't necessarily associate Rutgers with some of these companies, but lo and behold. And then of course, University of Washington out on the West Coast feeds some of the West Coast companies. So, point here just is, it would be good, I think, if we could be open-minded about college, look at alternatives, think about other metrics in determining which schools are the most attractive to our students. I think doing that helps deliver a message to students that there are more options than maybe just a narrow set that they hear all the time amongst their peers. And this last bullet is that different kids mature at different rates and follow different paths, and that's okay. And that's what I'm going to get to here in a minute. So interestingly, if you look at last year's class, 2015, we had 283 graduates, and we had about 2,400 applications to schools. So the average kid filled out or applied to 8 different colleges, universities. Again, that's not surprising, but I can tell you, having worked at the high school, that is a stress machine. It's stressful for kids who are completing these applications, stressful for their parents who are reminding them to complete their applications, stressful to the college council, the high school counselors and the teachers who are writing recommendations and trying to pump out transcripts and so on. But what's most interesting to me is we had 2,400 applications, but only 350 schools were applied to. And then, if you look at the schools that our kids actually attend, we dropped to 127. The point being that our kids are applying to the same schools, and they're being accepted to the same schools in some cases, and then they're attending the same schools. So just to give you an idea of what I mean, going back to the Barron's categories, there are about 93 schools rated as most competitive, and our students, for the most part, apply to all of those schools with the exception of 3 or 4, at least last year. There are 104 schools that are listed as highly competitive, yet our students only applied to about half of them. So almost half of the schools that are highly competitive didn't receive an applicant from Chatham. And naturally, some of that is understandable. We're probably not going to succeed in having lots of kids apply to states that may be far away. I mean, how many Chatham kids are going to want to go to Minnesota or Iowa or a Midwestern state? They're more likely to attend a school in the Northeast where their families are located. But even in the Northeast, there are colleges on this list that didn't receive an applicant or an application from a Chatham student. And these are great schools. There were a whole host of schools, 27 in total, that issued at least 12 acceptances to Chatham kids. You can see University of Delaware is basically the most popular school to apply to, and it, again, is a phenomenal school. And I'm going to pick on one school, and that is Gettysburg College. I'm going to pick on that school because I went to Gettysburg College, so I feel like I have license to do so. But also because Gettysburg is kind of right in the wheelhouse of Chatham kids. It's very popular with our kids. It's a highly competitive school, according to Barron's. It's ranked in the top 50 on US News and World Report, has other kinds of commendations. So it's a popular school. So over the past 2 years, we've had 25 kids gain acceptance to Gettysburg College. And it wasn't because of my connections. Of the 25 acceptances, 6 of the kids, when they began high school here, they took 3 or 4 honors level classes, and by the time those kids had finished and graduated, they had completed somewhere between 5 and 11 AP classes, depending on the student. So these are high-powered, high-performing, really strong kids, really strong students. 9 kids, when they started here, took 1 or 2 honors classes. And those kids, those 9, by the time they graduated, had taken either somewhere between 1 and 4 AP classes by graduation. 10 of the students, about 40% or so, had no honors classes when they began 9th grade. And they had taken somewhere between none and 3 AP classes by graduation. And I can tell you that there is at least 1 or 2 students here who were in concepts classes as a 9th grade. Interestingly, as I was looking at this stuff, so over the past 2 years, Gettysburg has enrolled kids that came from the top third of their class, the middle third of their class, and the bottom third of their class. And Gettysburg's not alone. So all of these schools in the past 2 years have enrolled kids from Chatham that have been in all 3 tiers of their class upon graduation. These are really good schools. I'm sure that there's some alumni probably from some of these schools in the audience, would be my guess. Let me pick on another school, Villanova, and I'm picking on that one because that's where the greatest number of kids, outside of CCM, 4-year schools I'm talking about, the greatest number of our graduates have gone on to attend in the past 3 years. It's been the most popular school. And it's also a phenomenal college. Economist had it ranked number 1, had it in the, I think, number 4, and US News has it number 1 in the North region for universities. Terrific school. And even at that school, I know it's hard to see, the numbers are a little bit smaller, but it's a similar pattern. It's a little bit more competitive than Gettysburg, but only 1 student who enrolled there had taken 4 honors classes in 9th grade, 9 students had taken 3. 11 students had taken 1 or 2, and 3 students hadn't taken any. And again, AP courses distributed as well. My point is, of course, that it's great if kids are taking honors courses and they're mowing down AP classes. If they can handle that and that's appropriate for them, that's wonderful. And we're proud of those kids, and we want to deliver them a program that is rigorous and that meets all their needs. But if a kid is not ready for that when they hit 9th grade, that's perfectly fine. In fact, our average student in 9th grade probably doesn't have an honors class on his or her transcript, and by the time she or he graduates, probably will have taken 1 AP class, maybe 2. Again, going back to these schools, all 3 tiers of the graduating classes. And it probably shouldn't surprise us, but when you start thinking about the numbers, you know, the main numbers that we often show, if you drill down into that, I've heard sometimes people say to me, you know, you guys do a great job of focusing on the top kids, or you guys do a great job focusing on the lower level kids or the special education students, but it's those middle kids that get forgotten. And I always have the same answer, which is that's not true. The middle kids are actually the driver. The middle kids drive this district. And if you look at what our middle kids are doing, the middle third of the student body, 2015, 98% of those students went to 4-year schools. Even the bottom third, 85% of them went off to 4-year colleges. Looking at it just in terms of competitiveness category, 90% of the kids in the middle third of the classes went to either very highly or most competitive colleges. Again, these are the kids who are not taking the 11 AP classes. And at the bottom third, roughly 2/3 went to very highly and most competitive schools. Distributed a little bit differently, but still doing just terrific things. So, in conclusion, that kind of wraps up the talk. Health and wellness is complicated. It's not just simply about having an anti-drug campaign or trying to work on stress reduction. I think it's more of a comprehensive, holistic look at what kids are dealing with and what their expectations are, what their goals are. College is an enormous part of that, and college is probably the place where we could use the most help from parents in terms of opening up the possibilities that we might consider for our students, and also recognizing, just like with those schools that took kids from the middle third, the bottom third, the top third, that our students are going to be fine. We don't have to stretch them too far if they're not ready. If they're ready, we can stretch them and keep stretching them, and they can be, Plastic Man. But if they're not ready, we don't want to push them too hard. We want them to develop at an appropriate pace. And if we do that, and we tend and pay attention to their emotional well-being, their readiness levels academically, socially, and otherwise, the rest, especially college, will turn out to be just fine. So thank you very much. I've done okay with time. So what I'm going to do right now actually is invite, Lisa, you might want to come up too. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but we have our student assistance counselors, Lisa Latterula and Alex Emmer, who volunteered to take the stage in case there are some questions for them about anything. And we do have one of our high school counselors here, and I didn't ask her to be on the stage, so if she doesn't want to be, she can stop right there and sit down. But that's Lisa Coolbear, and she's an expert in terms of college admissions and also seeing what's going on at the high school. So happy to open it up to anyone who might have a question about anything that I went over tonight. Yes. The high school is the toughest place for sure to control homework. We have this year, more than we ever have before, delivered a very clear message to teachers that we didn't want any assignments given over the long break in December. And Also, I think we did the same at Thanksgiving time. For an assignment to be due after one of those breaks, it had to have been assigned like 3 weeks ahead of time. The supervisors are having conversations with their teachers about homework and homework practices and consistency. But you're right, the high school is the place that's the most difficult, in part because of what I just showed. Because if you have kids who are taking, let's say, 5 AP classes, the AP curriculum is dictated largely by the College Board, and we don't have as much leeway to insist that the teachers don't provide homework. So we've got some progress still to make probably at the high school. And we have to balance the rigor that we want in our program and that we think our students and our parents expect with what is a healthy amount. But by the reports of the students too, you know, they weren't, I actually thought that students were going to report doing more homework. I was surprised at how many kids reported 1 to 2 hours, which I would think is a fairly reasonable amount. Thank you. The question is about the new SAT and how it will be, you know, kind of scored, or the impact it will have on the kids who are taking the new SAT versus the old SAT. It's a good thing Lisa did decide to come up on stage, otherwise I'd be in trouble.
I'm going to be very honest in saying that this is a difficult question to answer. Part of it is because we as counselors are still getting a good handle on, you know, the differences in the revisions of the new test versus the old test. We are being educated in that, though. I can tell you that we recently met with an organization called IB Ed, who came in and gave us sort of, you know, a little bit of some insight into the test. We need to review that information in more depth so that we can articulate it intelligently to families and parents and students who ask, which was the purpose in having them in. I can also tell you that we are getting some feedback that, again, it's going to vary by institution on terms of how they are viewed. Just as in the past when the writing was instituted in the, you know, SAT, we had many, many schools who still operated under the, you know, highest score in critical reading and math, but writing was not counted. And maybe that might only serve as a booster if the score was high. And then as the years continued and people did more research and got more comfortable with that section, then there were more schools that started to take a look at it. But again, it may have varied in terms of how, whether or not that was used for admissions purposes or again for placement, depending on the score. So again, it's hard to give a general blanket answer to your question because there are a lot of variables that are coming into play. And, you know, as I said, it's very important to us to want to articulate the information intelligently to you. So if you give us a little more time, we should be able to do that for you.
I can say this, though. Some of the changes are the result of the Common Core, result of losing ground to ACT. Last year was the first year that more students in the United States took the ACT than the SAT. The ACT is based more on content that you would learn in school as opposed to vocabulary and other tricks of the trade. You know, so the SAT is moving to eliminate some of that. You're not going to be penalized for leaving out I forget. You're not going to be penalized if you get if you leave out an answer, right? If you skip one.
Correct. Yeah, usually you're not penalized for omitting answers.
And we have a trend in our district, and we've had a trend now for quite some time, where more and more kids are taking the ACT each year and fewer kids are taking the SAT. So if it is designed, and some people think it's designed to kind of be more like the ACT, our students will probably, I'm guessing a good number of them will welcome that change because they've been gravitating toward the ACT.
If I could just add to that point, just to, you know, put some factual information out there, and I imagine that on the missions game on Thursday night, Peter Van Buskirk will probably, you know, touch upon this topic, but I know the question comes up for us all the time. If students are taking, you know, the SAT more than one time in terms of how you pick and choose which set of scores to send, it is wise to send them all, because the schools who superscore will take the highest combined of the sittings, and a student is not penalized for colleges laying eyes on the lower score, particularly if, say, the critical reading was higher in the March sitting and the math score was higher in the October sitting from 2 different test dates. So it's really important to keep that in mind, that the schools will still consider the highest overall combined score.
Okay, so the question, Lisa, was how much time as kids move from being freshmen to sophomore to junior, so forth, how much time do they spend sitting with their counselor to talk about some of the options and some of the values that might be out there? Before Lisa answers, I will just say that we, in relation to a lot of this, we're moving to put in some different protocols. Like, for example, we're talking about inviting schools in to Chatham High School that maybe have never been here before, so that, and then trying to trumpet those visits to students and say, hey, check this out. These 3 schools are coming in next week. You know what's really cool about this school? This. You know what's cool about this school? And try to get some hooks into kids. And we were talking about some other methods of doing that, sending out emails that spotlight a different school and programs in schools that kids might know about. There's a parent in the audience who was just telling me about a program at SUNY Geneseo, one of the schools that our kids did not apply to last year. That's absolutely dynamite. So trying to get more of that information out to parents and students. But Lisa, you can speak to the specifics of how often you get to counsel with your kids.
We spend a great deal of time with our students, and we're one of the few schools that I know of, anywhere in the immediate area where students are meeting with their counselor almost every year, with you as parents joining us in the freshman and junior and senior conferences, which are mandatory, and our sophomore conferences, which up to now have been optional, but of course many parents and students do request those, and of course if requested, we entertain those meetings, absolutely. I will say that, our department really is very, very focused on having well-balanced, healthy, happy students. And it is very, very important to us that when they come in as freshmen and we do the freshman conference, that we're focused on transition. So that's the main focus of the freshman meeting. If a sophomore meeting is requested, usually that's a continuation of that to make sure that there is a very good balance between your academics and your extracurricular activities, and that you are starting to think about, what those career aspirations may be, so that as those start to develop, then later on, and even during that time, our counselors can advise students on different course selections, electives that may dovetail with those goals. And then it's really not till the junior conference that we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of, college search, and then ultimately the application process in the senior year. And that's because there is so much development that really needs to take place in 9th and 10th grade for a student to really know and be able to research effectively in junior year and choose colleges to consider that are the absolute right fit for them.
What most surprised me and what was most concerning were those questions around suicide. And as you might imagine, I have a network of other superintendents. Suicide is something that other districts have experienced tragically, and it's always in the back of, it's always a concern. And I was really surprised at how high the numbers were, because I get phone calls at times about a student who we need to send out for an evaluation of some kind. Our assistant superintendent for student support services is here too, and he deals with all of those issues. But the number that we interact with on an ongoing basis over the course of a year is much, much lower than the number of kids who reported having made a plan. And that's the worst kind of thing. That's a gap you just don't want to see no matter what. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it in this kind of forum was we really want to know who those kids are. And if parents, and many parents of course probably don't know who they are, but if a parent has an inkling, we hope that they act very quickly, and we'd like them to involve us if it's appropriate. But that was definitely my biggest aha. Yep, absolutely. So in case you couldn't hear that, the question was, if your child comes home and shares with you that another child that she or he knows has expressed suicidal thoughts or is talking about suicide, what should you do as a parent if you don't even know the child or even know the child's parents or whatever? And I'm going to let Lisa or Alex answer that one.
Okay, So, a great question, and I think it is something that kids often struggle with, and that's why these kids go unidentified, because they want to keep the confidence with the child, like their friend, and they're afraid, of losing that confidence, so they say nothing. So I would just say it's great that your child actually came to you, because that's a good sign that they trust you. Because kids really have to go to an adult. I mean, this is something that needs to be dealt with adults. Kids can't be counseling each other on this type of topic. So that's a positive that your child came to you. I think that speaks volumes for you as a parent and your relationship that you have with your child. What I would say with that information is, first of all, I would also just look at it from your perspective. Say if it was your child, wouldn't you want to know? 100%, absolutely. So if you've really felt very uncomfortable yourself calling that parent, you could call me, okay? Or you could call Alex, or you could call a school counselor, and we will step in and handle that situation. Honestly, that's probably your best bet to do, instead of telling your child, putting it back on them and saying, well, now you need to go back to school and go talk to the counselor, because they may just feel very afraid to do it. So just call us, and then we'll handle the situation from there. We're really good about talking to families and to kids in these very sensitive situations and omitting people's names. We're not going to reveal confidence of how the information came to us. We just say, because we don't make the conversation about who it came from. It's really about what this is about and getting that person help.
And if I could just add, because I find that this really goes a long way with students, when you tell your child that you may or may not, be reaching out to the school to share what is very sensitive information and must be dealt with, applaud them for coming to you. Make them feel really good about the fact that they had the courage to share that information with you. That's really key.
That's great feedback. The feedback was, for those of you who couldn't hear it, that at the high school, and this is true in the middle school and even in younger grades, we've, of course, migrated to students having network accounts, and the network accounts have become learning management system accounts, whether it's Google Classroom or it's Schoology at the high school. And just like probably with all of us, or at least I know with me, you're never off. You just never leave. You're checking all the time. You feel obligated to check all the time. You feel guilty if you, don't look at what's been posted by another student or a staff member or whoever it is within 30 minutes, even if it's 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And in particular, you're touching on something that we have addressed, and that the feedback is good, because I will bring it back tomorrow. We have told teachers that they should not be posting assignments at latest after the school day, but preferably after their class ends that day. If that's when the homework, just like in the old days when they wrote it out, had your assignment pad and they wrote it on the chalkboard. If you're going to give an assignment, it should be given in class. You shouldn't say, make sure you check after 6 o'clock tonight, I'm going to post it then. That's just not acceptable. So we have been having those conversations, and that's very good feedback, because we do clearly need to build some kind of buffer system for kids so that they don't feel that they have to be checking all the time. Yeah, the posting of grades, that's a whole other issue. Yeah, we resisted actually opening up grade systems electronically for a few years, and eventually we did it, and I think most people like to be able to check in on grades, but there's no doubt that giving parents the ability to check grades at any time changes the dynamic significantly for kids, and it removes some of the ownership that they may have previously had about advocating for themselves with a teacher or working something out. There are times, and we try to avoid this, where a teacher will post a grade before a kid has gotten it. Kid will get home without having had the opportunity to talk about it with the teacher, and the parent is having the discussion with the student. And just like there are all kinds of students, there are all kinds of parents, and some of them have expectations that are different than others, and it's a sticky wicket the posting of grades? That's a great question too. We do have throughout our curriculum what we call metacognitive, content. Metacognitive just being learning how to learn. Certainly in places where we are providing services to kids, like in BSI, for example, or special education, we do a lot of that. I was just going to say, we do much less of it on a systematic basis for kids who don't receive services. So it's good. That is something definitely that I'll bring back too as feedback. Again, implementing that requires time, so you have to remove something that you're doing now, which isn't impossible, but it's a longer discussion. Thank you very much, Marion. I appreciate that. It's funny, you remind me of something we were talking about with the counselors at the high school today. I had mentioned that, one other thing I hear frequently is that a lot of these stats are skewed by the number of athletes. And for this presentation, I went to our assistant principal who handles athletics, asked them to touch base with every coach and find out how many kids from graduating class last year are playing this year. They're competing in some interscholastic sport. And it was fewer than 15. So we're talking about less than 5% of our kids actually go and play at the university level. Right now, scores of our kids are involved in athletics, which is fabulous, and it's healthy, and it's terrific. And you learn as much probably on the athletic field or on the course or the rink or wherever than you do in school. But it led us to this conversation about fit. And Lisa had shared that, she deals every year with kids who transfer, graduates who are getting their records again because they're transferring to another college or university. And it kind of went to your point, which was sometimes students may ignore a better fit because there's a name that is a siren for them. And it gets to the whole conversation about considering all of your options, being open-minded. There are tons of kids I've come across in my years here who got into a quote-unquote most competitive school, but ended up going to a very competitive or a highly competitive because there was a program, or maybe they got a few more dollars, or maybe they just liked it better. The fit just seemed better. And we were, Lisa, you can elaborate, but we were just talking about how to figure out what's a good fit for a kid and not get too caught up in, well, this one is, the average SAT for the, class was 1,500, and this one it was only 1,200, so I better go to the one with 1,500. That's not always the best way to make the decision.
Yeah, I'll just say to really keep in mind that it's a life experience. I know we all know that, but the experience is going to be what they make it when they get there and what they get out of it and what they put into it. But it's the research ahead of that that will create that positive experience for them. And it's just so important that after, before, during, and after, there's a lot of conversation about the fit, the criteria under which they would like to see their college experience be. I think that that's what should be the driving force in the selection. Less about the school itself, because ultimately they're going to be going to great schools, but more about the environment, the size, the type of academic setting they will be in, how close or far to home they think they want to be versus what's really going to be comfortable for them. Those are really important things to listen to and consider so that you can achieve that fit. I've had it both ways, I'm going to be honest. We don't have crystal balls. We can't always predict exactly how things are going to shake out. But in my 15 years at Chatham, in my 20-plus years in school counseling, I've had students who have gotten into their top choice, come back and said to me it wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. And then I've had students that have had to go to maybe their second or their third choice in the lineup after all the choices were in front of them, and have come back to me and said, Mrs. Coolbear, I'm where I'm meant to be. Things happen for a reason.
So thank you all very, very much for coming. We really do appreciate it. We have two more. Actually, we have a mindfulness wellness session coming up March 10th with John Grund, and I think that's here, but we'll get out another flyer. That'll be great. And we have two other speakers coming, one on March 15th, Scott Jurek, and then the other on May 23rd. So thank you all very, very much.